tonight I'll be talking about forgiveness. Tonight I'll be talking about forgiveness, which also contains elements of compassion. The topic of forgiveness, I was quite surprised recently. Someone told me that they'd gone to a certain Buddhist meditation teacher and asked, well, what did the Buddha say about forgiveness? And the teacher replied, nothing. And I was quite surprised. I was like, well, that's really not accurate. In that forgiveness, it's an element that runs through much of how we interact, both with others and also how we interact with our own mind. So there's a number of ways that we can start to approach the subject of forgiveness. One of the ways of starting is the way we so often like to start in Buddhism, which is by focusing, so-and-so harmed me, or so-and-so did something I dislike. So continually nourishing and feeding this sense of resentment, constantly holding on to this story of this person's past insufficiency in our eyes. What we see as their inappropriate conduct in the past. And defiled, some of which are wholesome, some of which are unwholesome. So in the course of working through all of their inner issues, an unenlightened being is going to make mistakes. They're going to do harmful things from time to time. And again, this applies equally to ourselves as it does to others. So also recognizing that we ourselves, being unenlightened beings, will make mistakes. Will periodically backslide or slip into unwholesome activities of body, speech, and mind. And that's not surprising. It's part of our practice, is recognizing those tendencies to backslide and doing what we can to work against them, doing what we can to constantly bring ourselves back to the path of goodness, the path of wisdom, the path of compassion. And actually the act of forgiveness is itself a way of moving back onto the path, a way of dropping that harsh, judgmental, negative, resenting mind, and bringing it back towards the path. So these are ways of starting to bring the mind out of that negative state of resentment in fairly direct ways. Other ways of working through it. So looking at the story that we build up, around why we're holding on to resentment towards some being, why we're not willing to forgive someone or let go of something that has happened. Again, it's questioning why. Why are we holding on to this negativity? Why are we holding on to this story? So I mentioned one example just now, which is holding people to a high standard, a standard higher than they're currently capable of, or at least can reasonably be expected of them. And also, again, looking at the story as being a fossilized record of a past event which has no relevance to current reality. So, for example, might be true. What might be true is that at one point in time they said something harsh. But everything is subject to change. In fact, everything is ephemeral. Everything is insubstantial. Everything is impermanent. Everything is constantly arising and ceasing. Everything is constantly shifting and changing. Including people's mind states, including people's emotions, including people's habits, including people's behavior patterns, including people's speech and thoughts. All of it is constantly changing. It started shrinking again. So at one point I was 6 feet tall, and now I've dropped down to about 5'10" or 5'11". So this is one of the fun things. So you get taller and taller, and then you start getting shorter and shorter until you die. Again, it's kind of a silly example, but it's something that we can relate to. It's like, oh, well, that's not who I am. I'm not the 3-foot tall person for all eternity. And also recognizing sometimes I'm gentle, sometimes I'm harsh. So because I'm a Buddhist, and particularly because I'm a monk, I'm trying to get rid of the harshness and build up the gentleness. But also it's recognizing that these are things that shift and change. So in the past I was more harsh and less gentle. Now I'm more gentle and less harsh. So something like this story, I am a harsh person. Well, that's not a true story. There are moments of harshness, but I am not a harsh person. But there are behaviors, there are activities which are harsh. So also recognizing that the moment we put somebody in a box, the moment we label somebody with a characteristic, then we've created the past. They're trying to become better people. We're all trying to be better people. In fact, the fact that you're here tonight is probably a good sign that you're trying to be a better person. So I'm seeing some nods. That's very encouraging. I was actually stunned the other day, a while back, somebody came to a meditation class and said that he didn't actually believe it was possible to transform the mind. And I was like, then why on earth did you come to a meditation class? It's so weird. Why would you come to a class on transforming your mind if you believe it's impossible? So the fact that we're here already indicates that we have some interest in becoming better people, in transforming and changing our mind from not so great into, hopefully, fully enlightened, like the best we can be. So also keeping that in mind. Keeping in mind that every single one of us has the capacity to become the most noble, exalted, praiseworthy being imaginable. Every single one of us has the capacity to attain enlightenment. So remembering that, rather than building the story of like, oh, that's that unenlightened jerk who says all those harsh, rude, mean things, and well, instead of building a story like that, instead we can build a story like, this is a person who is working through their defilements on the path towards becoming fully enlightened, on the path towards awakening. Isn't that a wonderful thing? So, I don't need to hold a grudge about their occasional failings. And I don't need to hold a grudge about my occasional failings either, because I also have that same capacity to become a Buddha, that same capacity to attain full awakening. So these are some of the ways that we can work on dropping the resentment and the grudge bearing that we tend to build up, on working through some of the obstacles that we have towards cultivating forgiveness. But it's important to recognize also that forgiveness does not mean foolishness. So one of the little nuggets of wisdom that I got from my father, and I didn't get very many, but one of the ones I did get from my father was, trust everyone but cut the deck. To cultivate contentment and equanimity, to cultivate wisdom and insight, because that's what will truly make this person happy. So it's again, it's looking past a person's current defilements and seeing the suffering that underlies it, recognizing that the person is experiencing a tremendous amount of internal difficulty as a result of their lack of self-training, their lack of self-development, and wishing for them to be free of that suffering, free of that pain. So this also is a way of starting to break through and cultivate a mind of forgiveness. It's recognizing the underlying suffering that inevitably accompanies unwholesome conduct. And again, this applies equally to ourselves as it does to others. So extending that same gentle, forgiving compassion towards ourselves. So I spoke about this quite a bit last week. I spoke about compassion towards oneself. And this is connected. So the willingness to forgive ourselves for our past mistakes. So many people are much harsher towards themselves than they are towards others. Many people are much more willing to forgive other people for their mistakes than to forgive themselves. From a Buddhist standpoint, that's just selfishness. That's just self-centeredness. So self-centeredness doesn't necessarily mean putting yourself above others. Self-centeredness can also mean putting yourself below others. So in Buddhist practice, we're looking to drop the self from the perspective entirely. Drop the self from how we're looking at it. So we just see There's a suffering being, here's a suffering being. I want them all to be free of suffering. Whether I label it as me or not me doesn't change the fact that they are suffering beings. These are beings who are caught in self-inflicted torment. And that's a sad thing, that's a terrible thing, and it's something that I want to see change. I want all beings to be happy. I want all beings to be wise. I want all beings to attain complete perfect awakening. So cultivating that attitude, then forgiveness comes naturally. We recognize that there's that this resentment or grudge-bearing mind is incompatible with that mind of boundless compassion. It's incompatible with that open-hearted willingness to see the capacity for greatness within all of us. The capacity for Buddhahood within all of us. And it's also recognizing, once again, that the path to Buddhahood is littered with mistakes. Because until we attain full awakening, we will be filled with defilements and delusions, which means we will constantly make errors. So recognizing that this, once again, it's all part of the path. It's all what's to be expected from beings who are on the path. It's all to be expected from those who are progressing towards awakening. So rather than fixating on the mistakes and the errors, instead we, first off, acknowledge the unwholesomeness of whatever's been done, acknowledge the mistake as a mistake. If it's something that we've done, then we commit to doing better in the future. We commit to not making the same mistake again. We commit to trying to develop a more pure, wholesome mind. If it's a mistake that somebody else has made, then what we can do is we can commit to helping them become a better person, if we have the opportunity. So this doesn't be available to help others improve. Putting ourselves in a situation of assisting others in the path. And this is actually an encouragement I would like to bring forward for further discussion. Yes?
I have a question regarding the dropping the self.
A little louder, please.
I have a question regarding dropping the self and other. When Bodhisattva take the oath to take others' suffering, take others' misfortune, isn't that a self? If there is no self, then it doesn't make sense that Bodhisattva is taking the misfortune from others.
Yeah. So, first off, I vow to liberate them. So that includes oneself. So the Bodhisattva vow is not, may I help everybody else get liberated and I'm never going to get there. That's not it. It's, may all beings attain liberation. May I do what I can to help all beings attain liberation. So that's a very pure vow. And part of what makes it so pure is that it does not have a self. And so what that's doing, it's like, so we're constantly putting ourselves above others. This is our habit. So then for a while we practice putting others above ourselves. And then what that does is it helps to make an equilibrium, where we stop making a distinction of me being either more important or less important than others. So then we can come to that purity of vow, where it's may all beings, without distinction, without separation, may all beings attain awakening. May all beings attain liberation. Does that make sense? You can use for that. One that's actually quite effective that I've personally had a lot of success with is, so if it's two people, then each person, and then you switch. Then the other person listens and takes notes, and you switch. And you keep going through this process until you've dealt with whatever needs to be dealt with. This is a very effective way of dealing with chronic miscommunication between two people. But again, it's important